There was a great video made by Leavitt, who is a former game developer that makes great, highly informative content on YouTube. A very underrated channel. If you haven't subscribed to him, I highly recommend it. One of the videos that he made is concerning the difference between social justice and actual justice. One of the key differences is that one cares more about the output and the inputs don't really matter at all, while the other one cares more about the inputs more than the output. The reason why I mentioned this video is that this point resonates with me as I read this article that I have right now, in which they complain about inputs and outputs. The article is titled, "Are Sisters Playing It for Themselves?" A weird question that I'm not really sure what it was supposed to answer. Then it proceeds to make this paragraph that just highlights my point completely.
Upon reading the response to the survey conducted by the board and the gaming community at Warwick, I found myself extremely disappointed when looking over the split between males and females. A measly 20.5% of the responses answered female, with 74.4% identifying as male, 2.6% pretending not to say, and the last 2.6% responding as other. It seems strange that even here, the millennial student campus, games are still very much dominated by males.
And this pretty much makes sense because your input is concerning gamers, and most gamers are men. There's a good reason why you absolutely need to distinguish between the casual gamers who only play mobile games and the hardcore gamers that dedicate a lot of time for their games. One of the key differences between the casual and hardcore gamers is that not a lot of casual gamers visit websites dedicated on gaming, nor do they even watch videos or channels that talk about video games. Did you notice that most of the people who talk about video games or make content for video games are centered in big AAA releases and or games released in the major platforms like the PS4, Xbox, PC, or Switch? Now, many statistics in the past, in which I've detailed in my other videos, have shown that while women do play video games, most of the games that they play are casual games. These casual games are so simple, you don't really need to learn more about the games at all. Due to its very nature, they're so easily accessible and playable, you don't really think about them for so long because they're just simple time wasters. This is different to more serious and demanding games like the ones being released in the consoles or PC. They certainly take a lot more time and dedication to play, and these are the sorts of games that not only leaves a lasting impact, but they're the ones that you want to talk about with your friends and make videos about. It's quite rare for people to make videos about casual games and how great they are. Every gaming YouTube channel out there is always going to be talking about PC games or console games and making content about PC games or console games. So when we're talking about the disparity that happens in your own gaming community, guess who made that happen? You. You only talk about modern AAA games or games that are released in consoles or PC. If you actually be more inclusive and talk about casual games, actually, I doubt that you can even attract women that way because these casual games are not their top priorities. They're just games that they play to waste their time instead of something that they dedicate parts of their life into. Now, if I'm looking at my own channel stats right now, you might notice that most of the people who watch me are men, and most of them came from the United States. That's because the topics that I chose are interesting for men, and most of YouTube's views came from the United States. If you're making a makeup tutorial video, you will have an inverse in the gender demographics. If you're making a video in Indonesia, your demographics might differ in the locations. But since I'm talking about video games in English, it's going to be men who watch more and people from the United States who watch more because they're more interested in games compared to women, and most of the people who speak English are in the United States. My point is, you need to consider your inputs before you even think about the outputs. Your output right now is around 1/5 of your audiences are women, and the rest are men because your input is to talk about video games, which is a hobby predominantly loved by men. This is the reality that you chose, but you're going to deny it because you don't like the outcome. You want it to have a 50-50. You can't accept that video games on average appeal to men more than women. You need to somehow create excuses and twist the input to make it as if men are actively kicking women out of video games. Apparently, these basement-dwelling virgins who never had any romantic relationships in their life also want to actively kick women out of gaming. The most counterproductive thing if I've ever seen one. If you think about how these people characterize male gamers, you might notice loopholes like that because they're nonsensical, and this article is going to perpetuate the narrative even further.
Yet beyond the appearance of a hyper-liberalized generation wrapped in trigger warnings, there lies a community still in part inaccessible for women. To understand why the industry and wider community still feels like men's clubs, you need to look below the surface and pay attention to the misogyny that continues to prevail, often internally or unintentionally.
Misogyny that prevails. This is a pretty damn hilarious theory. Why? Because I can throw this back at your face. You're basically saying that the cause of disparities in the gaming demographics is caused by misogyny. You know what else have a demographic disparity? Your own Warwick gaming community. Are you implying that misogyny is the one that caused the disparity in your own gaming community? Are you discriminating against women in that gaming community? I cannot imagine the misogyny that is running in the Warwick gaming community. Only 20% women. What, do you just kick off the 30%? Did you kick them out because they're women? Or is it because the gaming community is predominantly men and women are generally not interested in it? Maybe you should think twice before you write, because some of these logical leaps can be applied to you as well, and you are about as guilty as what you accuse people of. But then again, you're not well known on using your brains too well. Too much feelings and less facts.
It's hard to forget the vitriol, doxing, and threats of violence leveled at women during Gamergate. This level of abuse is something I've fortunately yet to experience, but it's understandable that any women could look back on such an event and feel uneasy or out of place in considering themselves a part of that community. I'm also tentative about writing on such an issue, conscious that every word and phrase may very well be taken as the testimony of an entire gender. My own experiences are unique, and I cannot claim to speak for the millions of women across the globe that also partake in this hobby.
Okay, so Gamergate is apparently one of the many factors that caused the disparity in the demographics. Gamergate constantly docks and threatens violence towards women in video games, and that's one of the many reasons why women are not welcome in video games. Let's accept that premise for now. That still doesn't dismiss the fact that video games are still a hobby that men are more interested in than women. Women can just pick up a random video game at the store, especially single-player games, and just play them without even worrying about those evil Gamergaters that say mean things online. But even then, women still refuse to do the job of buying a game and playing them. No game stores out there, online or offline, prohibits you in buying games because you have a vagina. Please name me one if you wish. And despite your vagina being totally irrelevant in buying games, women are just not interested in buying them at all. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that a lot of them are just not interested in gaming. Even if there are women being friended and doxxed by Gamergate, how many of them are there? How many people are in Gamergate? Are you saying that all gamers are Gamergate? How many victims of Gamergate are there? Are they enough to kick like 30% of women out of the gaming community? And from all the abuse being leveled at the victims of Gamergate, how many of them are genuine criticisms misconstrued as abuse? So many questions that need answering if you have just 1 inch of skepticism. But it's clear that this article is not written for an individual that have that capacity.
Nevertheless, the reactions I often get from men when they realize that I am into games are certainly different to the reactions they have when talking to other men about games. Most of the time I believe it is well intended, an exclamation of "oh" or "wow", often followed by a twist of the head and a moment of silence they take it all in. Perhaps the same surprise, charmed reaction someone would have if a puppy appeared from out of nowhere. "What games do you play?" is almost always the follow-up sentence, and there is nothing wrong with this question. However, what generally follows is an unwillingness to go deeper into the subject of any particular game or theme, as though they are unsure of whether I am capable of grasping a game beyond its cover or the buzzwords plastered across the back. When they do go further, the conversation usually slides into a monologue, as they talk you through their favorite moments and memories. It's quite something to have the final mission Dishonored mansplained to you after you have informed them that you have played both titles quite to death.
These 2 paragraphs are just your own personal diary of how some people are not treating you well in video games. They're not representative of the experience of all women in the gaming community, as you said before. If you're going to use your own personal story, maybe you should ask the stories of women who are a part of Gamergate. How can there be women in Gamergate, you might ask? Well, the answer might be because Gamergate isn't about harassing women in video games.
That's not to say that all interactions have been a patronizing talk down. Of course, I've had meaningful and interesting discussions with men about the games that we play. There are, however, fewer and far between than I would certainly like.
I think you personally just have bad relationship with your friends. If the meaningful and interesting discussions with men about the games that you play are only few and far between, that's on you. You need to pick better friends or accept for a fact that some people are smarter than you. That mansplaining thing, it feels like you attributed a man being smarter than you as misogyny. If you can't see why you have bad relationship with your friends, I don't know how else I can explain that to you. So let me make this simple. When your male friend explains things to you and you attribute that to misogyny, I think it's safe to say that you're not a very pleasant person to deal with.
It doesn't help that the industry is very much a male-dominated affair. Computer sciences, coding, and the area of STEM more generally can be notoriously off-putting to women. According to the Higher Education Statistics Agency, 19% of computer students in the UK universities are female, down 5% in as many years. Looking over the creative heads and industry celebrities bring to mind almost exclusively male faces, though there is greater balance in indie communities.
Let me explain to you why STEM is off-putting to women by asking this simple question. Do you think that women in general have the desire to sit on their computers and code stuff? Coding is a very taxing job, even for men. I know this because I am in STEM and I have coded before. This isn't a job that women are generally interested in. That's why you see those numbers. And those who are interested in it are some of the smartest, most passionate people that I've seen in a while. So yes, women in STEM is possible. It's just that it's quite rare to have them because of how off-putting the jobs computers can be. And how is the gender disparity in STEM fields bad? Why is it bad that certain fields don't have a balanced representation of men and women? Do you think sewage workers need better representation? I think you consider this a bad thing because you think that men are bad by default and you want to form some form of a crusade against them or something.
Despite protests to the contrary, male protagonists prevail wherever you look, and female characters are so often lacking their own validity, agency, or individual merit that I often find myself sighing at the screen that I play. However, some beautifully written female characters do stand out. Senua from Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn, Ellie from The Last of Us, Chloe and Nadine from Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, amongst others.
Should I raise an alarm every single time you say weasel words? You often find yourself sighing at the screen that you play on the sight of female characters that are lacking their own validity, agency, or individual merit. How often? Name me specific female characters that you sigh at because there are tons of them out there. You then proceed to list examples of female characters that you like, but if those are the range of your tastes, keep in mind that those games are released at the time where people finally understand and how to create narratives in big budget AAA games. You might notice that a lot of video games in the past don't exactly have a narrative presentation as powerful as games in current year, nor should they need to because games are just primarily about the gameplay back then, which is probably why they're better than games nowadays.
There are proof of the possibility and probability of strongly written female characters, and the diversity of their titles' appeal suggests that gamers of all genders aren't put off by seeing girls at the front. Furthermore, a 2016 study of 571 games found that overtly or exclusively sexual depictions of women in games are much fewer than during the peak period of 1990 to 2005. These are surely optimistic signs of the industry.
Can I ask you something? If men who dominate the video game market doesn't really mind playing as female characters, is it also true for the opposite?
So is Rockstar's claim to explore the concept of masculinity in GTA 5 a good enough excuse for the absence of roles and agency for female characters? Why did an exploitative teaser for the Tomb Raider reboot linger for so long and so unnecessarily over Lara's body? Why does Kojima's vision over a perfect female soldier rely on being scantily clad and completely silent to survive? Why do beloved Super Mario titles continue to recycle the same Save the Princess plotlines, and in case of Daisy or Rosalina, quite often the same female character? Because it's easy.
And it works. All of those games you cited are very successful. Because not all games need to have deep and meaningful female characters. They can also have simple storylines, caricatures, stereotypes, and even including fan service. Because story isn't always the one thing that makes video games.
These frustratingly docile or hypersexualized roles may be subsiding over time, but there still exists a casual and frustrating misogyny within the industry. Well-written, textured female characters are applauded because they are the exception. They are the few anomalies that are used to disguise the cardboard cutouts still common to most video games every time this conversation comes around. With an industry that struggles to acknowledge us and a community that seems unable to make it past our apparent novelty, is it any wonder that Warwick's female students aren't getting involved in gaming?
So Warwick's female students aren't involved in gaming because the gaming industry senpai didn't notice them enough, the gaming community just doesn't really like them that much, and there aren't a lot of good female characters in gaming. That or women in general are just not interested in playing video games.